All right, lesson 2.8 is graphing absolute value functions. Now, first of all, if you'll recall, absolute value is the distance a number is from zero. So when we start out, let's just go ahead and I want us to go ahead and I want you to graph the line. We're going to make a T-chart. And what we're going to do with this T-chart is we're going to graph the line y equals x. So let's just graph the line, start out y equals x. So let's just do 0, 1, 2, -1, and -2. Okay? So if x is 0, y is going to be 0. If x is 1, y is going to be 1. If x is 2, y is going to be 2. And if x is -1, y is going to be -1. And if x is -2, then y is going to be -2. So if we graph those lines, 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, -1, -1, -2, -2. We find out that it is a straight line. Well, what happens when the problem changes and it becomes the absolute value? So this time we're going to do y equals the absolute value of x. So let's use the exact same numbers, x and y. So let's do 0 is x, 1, 2, -1, and -2. Now remember, the absolute value is the distance a number is from 0. So if x is 0, the absolute value of 0 is 0. 1, if x is 1, the absolute value is 1. 2, if x is 2, the absolute value of 2 is 2. Now when we get to the negatives, remember the absolute value of -1 is 1, and the absolute value of a -2 is 2. So let's go ahead and graph these. We're just going to graph them on the same line here. So we get 0, 0, 1, 1, 2, 2, and then when we do the negatives, it's -1, but this time it turns to a +1. -2, +2. So we find out that this is actually a V shape for an absolute value. So for an absolute value, it's the V shape. Okay? Now, a couple of things to keep in mind when you're writing these. This point right here is called the vertex. Okay? It also goes through, there's an invisible line that goes through this. This is called the line of symmetry. All right, so let's go ahead and graph the one if x is +2. Okay, and we're going to make this one, we'll make it orange. All right. So if x is +2, we'll just add it on here. We'll call this y, we're going to call this y sub 2 for our second graph. So if x is 0, 0 plus 2 is 2. Absolute value of 2 is 2. 1. 1 plus 2 is 3. Absolute value of 3 is 3. When we have 2, 2 plus 2 is 4. Absolute value of 4 is 4. -1, we have -1 plus 2, which is 1. Absolute value of 1 is 1. And then when we have -2, we get -2 plus 2 is 0, and the absolute value is 0. So if we graph these points, we got 0, 2, 1, 1. We get 2, 4. -1, 1. -2, 0. Now we're not getting our V shape, so let's go ahead and finish this out a little further. Let's try -3. What happens if we have a negative 3? Well, we get negative 3 plus 2, which gives us negative 1. Absolute value gives us 1. So here's where this is going to turn. So if you'll notice, if I have a plus 2 on the outside, what happened to our graph? Because here was our vertex, but all of a sudden our vertex is slid over. And so anytime the vertex, this here needs to go to 0. Well, the only thing that's going to make it 0 would be a negative 2. Okay? All right. So the next example, let's go ahead and check out the next example. All right. Oops. All right, so here's the formula for graphing this. So if you were to graph this problem, it would be the formula A, absolute value of x minus h plus k. Now remember, the vertex, the formula here will actually give you the vertex. In order to get the vertex, though, the x-coordinate has to go, the part inside the absolute value has to go to 0. So what is the only value of x? So for example, if I had y equals the absolute value of x plus 2. Well, what does x have to be in order for the absolute value part to go to 0? Well, if this is plus 2, then the x has to be a negative 2. If I had x minus 3, well, what does x have to be in order for the part inside the absolute value to go to 0? And that would be a positive 3. So your x-coordinate is going to be h, okay? Or it's going to be the opposite. So if this says minus h, we're just going to change the sign of it. And your y value is going to be your k, okay? So the outside value is going to move it, cause it to move up and down. And the axis of symmetry is just going to be x equals whatever this value here is, okay? All right, so let's take a look at an example. And when you're graphing these, the very first thing that you need to do is you need to find your vertex. So on this one, if I wanted to find the vertex, remember it's always going to be to get this part here to 0. So the opposite of a plus 2 would have to give me a negative 2. And then this number here is our y value. So it's just going to be 3. So we graph that vertex. Negative 2, 1, 2, 3, positive 3. And if you'll notice, the number right out here, our a value, well, our a value is our slope. Okay? So right now, that is 1. So we're going to write it as a fraction, 1 over 1, because there's not a number there. Remember, anytime there's not a number coefficient, then it is 1. So if I rise 1, run 1, rise 1, run 1, rise 1, run 1, then I get half of this. But remember, an absolute value has to be a V shape. And the axis of symmetry, so if I went up 1 over 1, my other side is just going to go the opposite, up 2 over 2. So I go up 2 and I have to go back 2. Up 3, this way 3, and I also have to go this way 3. And that'll give you your perfect V shape. All right, so the next example. So first of all, we need to find that vertex. So if we find the vertex, remember the inside here has to go to 0. So what is x? Always ask yourself, what does x have to be in order to get that problem to 0? And that would be a negative 5. Well, since there's, then the next thing is our y value. Since there's not anything out here, then that y value is just going to be 0. So go ahead and graph that point. 1, 2, 3, 4, negative 5, 0. Okay? And remember, our a value sits right here. There's not a number, so it's just going to be 1 over 1. And remember, our line of symmetry is going through this negative 5. So we got to go up 1 to the right, up 1 to the left, up 2 to the left 2, up 2 over 2. Okay? So we get our V shape. Okay. The next problem is a U-try. So go ahead and graph this problem. Go ahead and pause the video. Go ahead and graph the problem. And when you're finished, go ahead and restart the video. Okay, so if we go ahead and start this, we get absolute value of x minus 10. And remember, we have to get our x value is the part inside the absolute value has to go to 0. Well, since we're not adding or subtracting anything to it, x just has to be 0 in order to get us that value, that inside value of 0. And remember, the outside is our y value, so it's going to be negative 10. So we go ahead and graph that part. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is right here. And our a value is 1. So we got to go up 1 to the right one, up 1 to the left one. From those, we can go up 1 to the right one, up 1 to the left one. Okay? So we get that nice V shape. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and try the next example. Now, if you notice, the ones that we've been doing, that outside value, that a value, has always been 1. But in this example, that a value is actually 2. So first of all, we need to find our vertex. So our vertex is going to be what's going to give us our 0. And that would be a negative 6. The outside value is a negative 10. And our a value this time is 2. And we need to write that as a fraction. So let's go ahead and graph that. Negative 610 is going to be right there. But this time, all the ones before from that point, we've had to go up 1 to the left or right one, up 1 to the left one. But this time, how many times are we going to go up? Because it's just like slope, rise over run. We're actually going to rise 2 and run 1. Rise 2 and run 1. Okay. To get the other side of the V, we're going to rise 2, go to the right one. The left. Rise 2 and go to the left. And then we'll get our V. Okay. All right. Good job. This concludes graphing absolute values, so you can go ahead and start on your assignment.